And welcome to our Davis campus. I am Dr. Janet Morrison, and I'm tremendously proud to serve as Sheridan's president and vice-chancellor. I want to thank you all for joining us today here in Sheridan's Magna Skilled Trade Center, where my colleagues delivered trailblazing education and programs that are critical to economic growth in Canada. Since 1967, Sheridan has delivered world-class post-secondary education supported by exceptional student services and fueled by our commitment to experiential learning and applied research. As we gather today, we acknowledge that all of Sheridan's campuses reside on land that has been and still is the traditional territory of several Indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. As an institution of higher learning, Sheridan recognizes and embraces the critical role that education must play in facilitating real transformational change. We continue our collective efforts to recognize Canada's colonial history and to take steps towards meaningful truth and then reconciliation. So I see some familiar faces amongst us today and some students, which is always awesome. To our members of Parliament, I'm not sure if Mayor Brown or Councillor Santos are here today, but certainly champions of Sheridan's work in this city, to Sheridan leaders, to our students, to our staff, and to community partners from across the broader Brampton community, thank you so much. And to our special guest today, the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, welcome to our learning community, and thank you for including us in this announcement. Sheridan is, as I hope everyone in this room knows, deeply vested in the integrity and promise of studying at the post-secondary level in Canada. In furtherance to our shared values and commitments, we've been collaborating with the City of Brampton and many other local community organizations to improve the international student experience for learners, not just at Sheridan, but for those who may be enrolled elsewhere too. Last year, Sheridan and the city hosted an international student summit that brought together more than 200 participants, including members of all three levels of government, international students, academic researchers, post-secondary administrators, private and public colleges, and community agency leaders. The result of that summit was the creation of a charter for improving the international student experience, a concrete plan aimed at making a positive difference in the lives of international students who choose to study and often stay in Brampton. Some of those solutions proposed in the charter identified relate specifically to enrollment and visa application processes. Please know, Minister, that as an educator who has invested over 30 years in positioning every learner for success, I was thrilled to hear that the update being announced today will positively impact those important processes. So let's get to it. It is my pleasure to introduce our local Member of Parliament for Brampton South, a community leader who invests so much of her time and self in listening, engaging, and connecting with Sheridan and our students. Please, everyone, join me in welcoming my friend, MP Sonia Sidhu.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sonia Sidhu, Member of Parliament from this beautiful riding, along with my colleague, friend, Ruby Sahota, and Shafkat Ali, Member of Parliament from Brampton Centre. Today we are gathering on the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And we are joined today by the Honorable Marc Miller, the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship. Minister Miller was raised in Montreal, where he received his law degree from McGill. He previously served as a Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations and Minister of Indigenous Services, and Minister Miller has a second visit here today in this beautiful riding. We are pleased to have Minister Miller here in Brampton South at Sheridan College, one of the largest colleges in Ontario and home to many great programs like the graphic designs program that is world-renowned. The city of Brampton is one of the most diverse and inclusive cities in this country, and we are happy to host Minister Miller for this announcement. It is good to have another minister visiting our city for another announcement after last week when the Prime Minister and the Minister of Housing announced $114 million to build 24,000 homes in our city of Brampton. It is clear that the voice of Bramptonian is being clearly listened to by our government, and Minister Miller is here to make another announcement. Please join me to welcoming the Minister to give us an update to the International Student Program, as well as on the update on the task force to support that international students who were defrauded by unscrupulous immigration consultants. Please welcome to Minister Miller.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Sonia, thank you so much for welcoming me for the second time in my tenure as Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to your neck of the woods, and to Ruby and Shafkat for being here as well. Dr. Morrison, thank you for welcoming for this beautiful institution, and we know how responsible you are because you didn't let me touch any of the expensive equipment, which was very well thought out. And thank you as well to Sonia and Janet for acknowledging the original peoples of this land. I'm here today to provide you with an update on our work regarding the review of the International Student Program and some of the reforms that we'll be implementing as a result. As you're likely aware, the use of fraudulent admissions letters has been a major concern for my department this year and continues to pose a serious threat to the integrity of our student program. I want to stress this point. International students are not the problem. They come here with hopes and dreams, and they are essential to building this country and the future and the ambition that we set ourselves for a country. I've met with a number of international students today, Puneet, for example, who spoke so eloquently about the precarious position that she's faced in her journey to permanent residency and the anxiety and fear that that's created. That is magnified when we have a system that has lost its integrity and is subject to, at sometimes, some of the worst aspects of fraud. Starting by the end of the year, we're taking steps to prevent this type of fraud by introducing an enhanced system of actually verifying the letters of acceptance directly with post-secondary institutions for all overseas study permit applications. Canada is a major destination and a top destination for international students, thanks to our open, welcoming communities and high-quality educational institutions. Between January and August of this year, we've received over 608,000 study permit requests while processing over 600,000 of these in the same period. International students, as I mentioned, bring a lot to Canada, benefiting campus life and Canada's multicultural spirit in communities across the country. By being open to international students, we benefit from new ideas, ways of learning, and researching coming into our post-secondary system. And clearly, this movement of students to Canada brings with it significant economic advantages as well, with international students contributing well over $20 billion to our GDP annually. Beaucoup de ces étudiants découvrent notre pays, veulent y rester et remplir les postes vacants lorsqu'ils obtiennent leur diplôme. Chaque année, des milliers d'anciens étudiants étrangers remplissent des conditions requises et font la transition vers un séjour permanent. Cependant, nous devons disposer d'un système fiable, équitable et efficace. Nous voulons que tous les Canadiens sachent que nous agissons pour préserver l'intégrité de notre système d'immigration. The issue of letter of acceptance fraud really came to the forefront earlier this year. Immigration, Refugee, Citizenship Canada and Canada Border Services Agency investigations were already underway when in June, fraudulent letters of admissions were reported. The investigation identified nearly 1,550 study permits applications initially connected to fraudulent letters. In most of those cases, the fraud was detected and the application was refused. In approximately 450 of the remaining cases, fraud wasn't identified during the processing and study permits were issued. In some cases, people have shown up at the doorsteps of institutions to find out that their hope has been dashed. When media reports surfaced, a number of international students came forward as victims, not participants in the submission of the fraudulent documents. And I'd also say that because of the precarious nature of some international students, there is a hesitancy to come forward. And that only magnifies the fact that this could very well be the tip of the iceberg. To ensure that genuine students were supported, an IRCC task force was struck to review the facts of cases for individuals once the Immigration and Refugee Board had completed its proceedings. Pour identifier les étudiants qui sont des étudiants véritables, l'examen du groupe de travail cherche à savoir si les étudiants se sont inscrits à un établissement, s'ils ont terminé leurs études, s'ils étaient conscients des stratagèmes frauduleux, s'ils avaient des liens avec des activités criminelles ou s'ils avaient fait d'autres fausses déclarations dans leur dossier de candidature. Of the approximately 450 cases, there were 285 of interest to the task force. And as of mid-October, the IRCC task force had reviewed 103 cases and determined that 63 students were genuine students. In 40 of these cases, these individuals were found not to be genuine students. For those students found to be genuine students, 30 were issued temporary resident visas. Most of the remaining cases are still before the IRB, and the task force will intervene where appropriate once adjudicative processes are concluded. As we continue to review the International Student Program, I can also confirm that we'll move ahead with a new recognized institution framework. We've been actively engaged with stakeholders, including Sheridan College, post-secondary education associations, and learning institutions on this concept, and we'll continue to refine it. We plan to implement the recognized institution framework in time for the fall semester of 2024. The framework would recognize those institutions whose international students benefit from top-class services, housing, and other supports. Our goal here is to punish the bad actors, make sure that they are held accountable, and reward the good actors who provide adequate outcomes for the success of the international students. Such institutions that are recognized could benefit from, for example, faster student permit application processing destined for the students destined to their school. And as we move towards implementing it next year, additional details will be shared to fully explain how institutions would become recognized and what benefits that would bring. I would also caution people who have demanded for a one-stop solution, that we put a cap on things, that we sort of bring down the hammer on an ecosystem that is rife with perverse incentives. I've met enough people in this field to know that the lived experience of international students is too complex to come up with a simple formula and simply have the federal government stomp in and pretend that it has all the solutions. My job is to solve for fraud and to make sure that my department and the federal government is doing its job. But I do want to add that the accreditation, the designation of designated learning institutions is made by provinces. And they have a primary role in this, in making sure that those institutions are doing their jobs. We have a challenge in Ontario in particular, but it is not the only province that has faced challenges. But we need to do it together. And the federal government is coming forward and opening its arms to our provincial partners, territorial partners, to make sure we all do our jobs properly. If that job can't be done, the federal government is prepared to do it. But for right now, we need the provinces in particular, and in the case of Ontario where we are, to look at the Auditor General report that was issued in 2021 with respect to public and private colleges and work on implementing some of those recommendations. They are key to the vitality of the people that I spoke to today. They are key to the integrity of the system, and they are key to what Janet so aptly said is responsible growth. I'm not here to shut down a business model that makes sense, but what we are seeing in the ecosystem is one that has been chasing after short-term gain without looking at the long-term pain, and we need to reverse that trend. But it will take time, and a simple solution is not the one that we're presenting today. We will gradually move into it and make sure that we do our job first as a federal government, but work with our provincial counterparts to make sure that that job is done in a way that keeps international students like the ones I spoke to today at the heart of every decision-making process. Finally, I'd add, because this, and I won't add too much detail to this because it is a work in progress, we also want to signal our plans to introduce reforms to the post-graduation work permit program. We know that there is an arc to this. People don't just come to the country to study and necessarily to leave. Some do, but we know that this is also a pathway to permanent residency and Canadian citizenship eventually, but it has to go through a program that makes sure that we are incentivizing the trades that are in such great need in this country. We have a labor shortage in this country, and it cannot be filled domestically. That is the reality of the aging population that we have, and it's the reality that we need to face in a responsible fashion if we are to grow our gross domestic product responsibly, but also if we were to have all the services that all the aging population expects us to have in a country like Canada. The program that I'm speaking about hasn't been reviewed in a decade and has grown considerably in parallel with the increasing number of international students in Canada. In the coming months, we'll do continued work to make sure that we actually align this to the arc that I was speaking about, to make sure that someone that is coming here for studying can get a job and can move into perhaps a pathway to permanent residency. So I would expect to announce more details in the coming months on that particular piece of the reform. I'd also add that in the last year we've brought online new technologies that assist with study permit renewals that use an automated tool to review applications and provide a summary to case officers for a final decision. I stress on that point that the final decision always remains with a human and case officers. This has improved our processing time, and it's really something we need to do in the context of the 21st century. Our immigration system is reliable and will continue to act to prevent fraud by criminals and unscrupulous actors. I remain committed to supporting all genuine students who came here with hopes and dreams, hopefully doing what we need to do better in matching supply and demand. That's why we're acting here today, to support hardworking people and ensure our systems are secure and effective. I can't do it, we can't do it, the provinces can't do it without people like Dr. Morrison, without institutions like Sheridan College, and all the ones that are essential to the future and our responsible growth in this country. So I know perhaps some of you have questions. I'll leave it at that and simply want to thank you for taking the time to come here today. Merci.
So thank you, Minister Miller. I am very much looking forward to seeing the impact this announcement will have on learners who often, at great personal sacrifice and with an abundance of courage, choose Canada and come to our great country from around the world. I just want to underscore, I have a lot of experience talking to learners and alumni. These students, graduates, are extraordinary. They're talented and smart, engaged, ambitious, and they will go on to drive economic and social outcomes for Ontario, for Canada, and the world. I could brag about Sheridan's International alumni for hours and hours and hours. But those learners, current and prospective, deserve bold leadership and the highest standards of system integrity. On behalf of everyone here today, thank you, Minister, for your unwavering commitment to delivering on that imperative. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'll now turn it over to the IRCC team to navigate media inquiries. Have a great day, everyone.
Amazing. So we'll now go to questions from the media. We'll have a few on the floor, and then we'll go to some questions on the line. If you could say your outlet and your name, that'd be fantastic. We'll go here first.
Hi, good morning. My name is Hamreen. I'm from Punjab TV. Mr. Miller, my question to you is, since we know that international students are considered an integral part of our country, but we have seen that when students enroll themselves in any colleges or universities, and once the first semester is over, just a couple of days before the second semester commences, there is a sudden increase in the hike of the fee, which is considered a major problem, because then students have to go all the way out of their budget to just compensate for that money that they have to pay to the colleges and universities. What's your take on that?
I have lots of views on that. I have the privilege of seeing this ecosystem that's been created from a 1,000-foot perspective. I have been an international student myself, so I'm not going to pretend. But I'm not going to pretend that I have the experience that I heard today from the 3 students that spoke to us so poignantly about their experience and their pathway to Canada. We know that there has been consistent underfunding of post-secondary education, particularly by provinces, depending on the province over the years. And institutions are smart and have adapted to that. That has gone through, at times, opportunistic fees that have been charged to international students to close a gap that is really an unnatural one and shouldn't be the case in a country like Canada. That's a reality that we all have to start talking about. It's created a sense, and I've talked a lot about fraud, but there is also perverse incentives that have been created as a result, and they've magnified greatly over the course of the last 3 years, and particularly as we exited from COVID. So what you're saying is only a small example of a system that is very, very lucrative, not necessarily for the federal government, but for institutions and provinces that have had a model of underfunding of post-secondary educations. It is a big issue that we need to discuss. But I'm not the minister in control of that, and I lose credibility when I'm in other people's business. I absolutely, when I speak to students and hear their experiences, I have the absolute responsibility to speak about it. But I need to be at the table with those that need to fix it. This is the case, and I've talked about Ontario today, but this is the case in Quebec as well, and it's the case in other provinces. I don't blame the institutions for having adapted, and I don't blame the students for their willingness to come to a country like Canada. But it is one that costs a lot and has real human repercussions. And what we're seeing more and more that we hadn't perhaps seen 10 years ago is this is having an impact on students looking for housing. And I don't want to blame in any measure international students for the housing crisis that governments, including Liberal and Conservative ones federally, have spent decades not investing in. But it is a reality that those students are in a much more precarious position than they have been in a prior generation. And I think those are all discussions I think as a country we can overcome. But we need everyone at the table to start talking about this. Again, I'll repeat again, my job is not to turn off the tap to responsible growth, but it's to talk about responsibility and making sure that we are all doing our jobs properly. I can't fix fees overnight. The federal government has very little to say in the fees that are charged, but we are aware that it's happening.
Perfect. So we'll continue on the floor with Global News. It's one question, one follow-up.
Minister Miller, my question is about the task force that you talked about. What is the mandate of this task force? Is it specifically about the 263 cases, or is it, are we possibly looking at a long-term sort of a tribunal that looks at all of these cases to make sure, as you said, that people who are victims of this fraud are not punished with measures such as deportation in some cases? Yeah,
and I'll take a step back and say that and just to be clear, not every issue and element of fraud will be addressed by today's announcement. This will be progressive, and it will be able to achieve some of the outcomes in cutting out some of the clear cases of outright fraud. So that's important. The task force plays a really important role in the cases that I spoke about today, and we can give you all the details in where that work is in a little more detail than what I provided to you today. But we will absolutely ready to expand the task force to have a greater mandate as we see cases arise, because there needs to be an adjudicative process that is not that goes far beyond the minister exercising his discretion in this case. So that's part of the tools in the toolbox we'll be able to use to expand their ability to look into cases of people that have been tricked or themselves have been the victim of fraud knowingly. And I think there's gray areas in there that we have to deal with some level of humanity. But the reality is if you've committed fraud and you're in this country, you don't have any particular business staying here. An outcome that's different than that undermines the credibility of the system and the really bright students that have come here in good faith.
You talked about the sky-high fees that international students pay, and you also talked about who has what responsibility. I'm wondering what you think about the fact that colleges and universities earn tens, if not hundreds of millions from international student tuition. What do you think of the notion that colleges and universities have an obligation to ensure affordable housing for international students that come in? If you're going to bring in people into this country, you also have an obligation as the person earning this windfall revenue to house international students. You know, the NDP has spoken about this. I wonder what your view of that is.
Oh, I agree with it. I'm not going to force institutions to build housing, but I think some of the more intelligent aspects of the recognized institution framework is that it does have criteria in it that will make people eligible to be part of that group if they can demonstrate that they have proper housing for those students, what the measures they've taken to make sure that students are properly housed, what measures they take to accompany students in their challenges with mental health. You know, years ago we weren't talking about mental health. We are talking about mental health today, and it was raised today as a really important factor in how institutions deal with the student experience. And a couple of other categories that will be part of the indicators as to whether an institution is recognized, therefore being eligible to an expedited process and a light touch on the visa process, and those that are not. I would stress again that provinces do have a role in making sure in their DLI model that there is housing. You know, the worst of sort of the private colleges are storefront fly-by-night operation, and they're really they're really dashing people's hopes in this country that are coming here, and those need to be shut down.
Okay, we'll take our first question from the line now. A few technical difficulties. We'll continue with questions on the floor. I think we have Filipino TV over here.
Good morning, Mr. Minister, and good morning to all the officers. My question is in behalf of the many international students that we talk to in our station. Filipino TV is in the middle of making a documentary on international students in Canada. And many of their concerns are from the pathway from being international students to being permanent residents. A lot of them have been working and have been contributing to the companies where they're working now. I'm actually one of the examples. I was a former international student as well. And I'm also one of those waiting, but then I'm asking for them, for us, including me also. But like a lot of them, they say, are in the CEC, Canadian Experience class, and they've been waiting for more than 2 years, some until 5 years, some until 6 years. And while they're waiting, there's a lot of challenges, like just to maintain your status here in Canada, you constantly have to renew your papers. There's a lot of, you have to take the IELTS again and all these things. And their question is, since September 2021, there hasn't been a draw on the CEC. Is there an update on that? And also, is the ministry open to maybe forging another stream, another pathway that's more directly from international students to permanent residents?
Yeah, and I think and thank you. I think it's important to stress that being an international student or being a prospective international student isn't a guarantee of permanent residence or a guarantee of citizenship. Unfortunately, part of the fraud is unscrupulous agents, both in Canada and outside Canada, entertaining that false hope that if you can get into a program, you can become a Canadian citizenship. There have been, as you mentioned, and I'm sure you've covered this, there are limited pathways from to permanent residency. I do recognize, and this is work that is currently ongoing, I don't have anything to announce to you today, but this is work that is going on, particularly with some of my stakeholders in the construction trades and other industries to make sure that we are not becoming even more addicted to temporary foreign workers with all the realities that has created in a country such as ours. Depressed wages, exploitation at times. Not to say that there aren't good actors, there are. But what part of that ecosystem, I know I keep using the word, is it does have that aspect of creating some very perverse incentives. And so what I'm looking at, quite frankly, is a number of things that we could potentially announce over the next few months, including increasing the points we attribute to skilled trades, and opening more clear paths to permanent residency for those people that are already here. And I don't have anything to announce today. There's still some work being done by my team to make sure that we refine that. But what I don't want to do is continue to entertain the atmosphere of uncertainty that a lot of people face, particularly people that have fallen out of status, and their skills are needed to be, in terms of regularizing their status, but also perhaps providing a pathway to permanent residency. So there are a few ideas that are being toyed around. Recognize the value of the statement you made, as well as the people that are looking to become permanent residents. But I will stress that it should not be a foregone conclusion that if you're an international student, and I would say not all international students want to become Canadian citizenship, that's their right. But that is sort of a line that's being used to try to attract people here and then often take their money and leave them in a very desperate situation. At the center of this, we have to keep the students in question and a level of humanity at the federal government. So as I talk about programs, make sure we focus on those people that we are seeking to retain in this country. Thank you.
Amazing. We're going to go to the line again.
Appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. When prompted by the system, please clearly state your name to register your question. Lorsque le système vous invite, veuillez indiquer clairement votre nom pour enregistrer votre question. There will be a brief pause while participants register for questions. Il y aura un court délai vous permettant de vous enregistrer dans la ligne d'attente pour la période des questions. Thank you for your patience. Merci de patienter. And we will take the first question is from Rafi Bonjikanian, CBC News. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for that. Minister, I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the idea that universities that set higher standard for services, support, and outcomes for international students will benefit. I'm wondering, can you talk about what kinds of services would you expect them to extend? Could that include housing, for example?
Yeah, thank you, Rafi. You know, a number of the indicators that will be finalizing as part of our launch in September for the recognized institution model include specific references to housing and the services that institutions have to provide to be part of the recognized institution model. Some of them are already doing it. They can obviously do it better. And others, I think, will be striving to reach those goals. It isn't, as you know, every institution that automatically provides housing, adequate or inadequate. So there'll be some institutions that automatically qualify just by the excellent work that they've been doing, and others that will be looking to enhance their services so that they can be part of this model that will entitle them to faster treatment. We could at another date provide you sort of a cursory list of what those indicators are, but they do revolve around what I was mentioning to one of your colleagues who asked the question in person, which would be physical indicators of what services, in terms of mental health services, student accompanied journey services, the ratio that they have of foreign students to domestic students, as well as housing needs that are supported. So that'll be really important as we move along, and when we look at the uptake and finalization of the model. I think as the federal government, what we were loath to do was to come out with a set of hard and fast indicators with ratios that we hadn't properly vetted, and then have some consequences that were totally unintended. So there's all that to say, Rafi, is we still have some work to do in finalizing it, but the indicators that I mentioned, and there's about 8 or 10, deal with essentially how institutions treat their students and the indicators that do underpin that conclusion. We'll obviously ask those institutions to provide support. We know now that we have to have a trust but verify model, but it's very much one that'll be finalized in the coming months.
Thanks. And just as a follow-up, if we can just look ahead to next week, I know your immigration levels plan is due soon. Are you shutting out any possibility of reducing your immigration target? And I'll ask you to answer that in English and French as well, please, for Radio Canada.
Je répondrai en français d'abord. Si les gens ont bien écouté l'annonce aujourd'hui, on a besoin d'immigrants au pays pour, si on veut remplir tous les ambitions qu'on a en matière de logement, de matière de construction, d'infrastructure pour l'avenir. Je ne reviendrai pas au phénomène de dénatalité, puis la courbe démographique qui n'est pas très bonne au Canada. Évidemment, la population qui doit se rajeunir, l'immigration est une porte d'entrée et une piste de solution à cette fin. Dans le contexte, je l'ai dit publiquement, que j'avais beaucoup de difficultés à voir une situation où on réduirait. Dans cette optique, y a-t-il lieu d'avoir des ajustements? Selon moi, oui. Devrait-on stabiliser? On regarde ça présentement. Je vous dirais, Rafi, la décision, je sais qu'elle approche le 1er novembre, mais elle n'est pas encore entièrement arrêtée. Il y a des discussions au plus haut niveau qui se poursuivent. Donc, ça pour dire que vous allez devoir attendre jusqu'au 1er novembre pour avoir une réponse finale. Rafi, as I said in French, a final decision has not been taken. There are still discussions at the highest levels being undertaken. I think people are very well aware of two phenomena. One, the importance of immigration in increasing our gross domestic product. This is one of the most significant economic vehicles to our country, but we need to do it in a responsible way. The net entrance into the workforce is 90+% driven by immigration, so any conversation about reducing needs to entertain the reality that that would be a hit to our economy. I've said previously that I don't see a scenario in which we reduce, but within that context, do we look at the categories that we use to make sure that we are the vital country that we are, as well as a humanitarian and open country for people fleeing war? Is there space within there to look at and revise some of those numbers in different categories, and perhaps be a little more innovative and fine-tuned as we move from matching less hope with demand, but actually supply with demand, and that is sort of a broad brushstroke to say finally that as the decision hasn't been taken, you'll have to wait for the 1st of November, but it doesn't mean that I'm holding a secret back on you. The discussions are actually still ongoing, but those are some of the public reflections that I can share with you at this time.
Okay, so we're running very close to our 11:30 end time. Our last question will be over here from the floor.
Hello Minister, this is Tarundeep Singh from PTC Punjabi. There is a petition already available on the page of House of Commons, which is E4454, and already have nearly 16,000 signatures, that too in just 1 week on it. which is about providing 5 years of work permit to those who study for 2 years in Canada and 2 years of work permit to those who study for 1 year in Canada. So how long will Government of Canada will take to implement it? And if not, what are the plans to accommodate these international students in the country? As data shared by StatCan shows that there are currently 1.94 million international students in the country.
I guess the ultimate question, the initial question really is whether we agree with the petition. And that's something that is, I think is still something we would have to revise and is a work in progress. So I can't promise you today that I will commit to that. What I have committed to is to look at the postgraduate work permit and revamp it. It hasn't been looked at in 10 years. So that's part of the work that we have announced sort of cautiously today, and that will be work that's ongoing. The discussions that I'm having with trades, with unions, with industry, are ones that really much revolve around the labor shortage and the specific trades that need to be filled in this country if we're going to be the ambitious country that we stand in front of podiums and talk about. So I think there's a ton of options on the table. Whether the solution proposed in the petition is the one that I would favor is not something I could speak about today, but understand the principle behind it and certainly understand the needs in this country.
Okay, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.